President Trump claimed for weeks that U.S. airstrikes completely and totally obliterated Iran's nuclear sites, even as experts and evidence suggested that might not be true. But then a vague assessment came from the CIA director, John Ratcliffe, citing, quote, new intelligence from an unidentified source confirming the sites had been, quote, severely damaged. And now people are asking once again, is the CIA really all that trustworthy as an intelligence agency? Because a new book is also issuing this warning on how politicized intelligence has become under President Trump and how dangerous that could be, saying, quote, as the president assaulted its civil liberties and democratic institutions seeking to finish the job his mom had started, the instruments of its intelligence and national security were in the hands of amateurs and toadies. The foundations of its foreign policy were corroding and crumbling. The ranks of the CIA's most experienced spies and analysts were thinning. Its irreplaceable ties to its closest international allies were fraying. The risk of a catastrophic intelligence failure was as high as it had been at the start of the 21st century. Wow. Joining us now, Tim Weiner, Pulitzer Prize-winning author of the new book, The Mission, The CIA in the 21st Century. Thank you so much for being here, Tim.
My pleasure, Katie.
I want to be clear, this is not just about President Trump. You're talking about, I mean, you've talked about the history of the CIA, but this latest book is the past few decades. How has politics eaten away at the mission of the CIA?
The CIA is supposed to be an apolitical institution. Its job is espionage, to go out and steal secrets, to get foreigners to commit treason on behalf of the United States, and to analyze the intelligence it collects. Problems arise when presidents don't listen to the CIA's warnings of dangers over the horizon. The CIA tried to warn George Bush 25 years ago that al-Qaeda was about to do something terrible. Where and when, it could not say. The president disregarded this, disregarded the CIA's pleas to get on a war footing against al-Qaeda, and we were attacked. The CIA has not always been trustworthy. Its analysis that Saddam Hussein had a huge arsenal of nuclear and chemical and biological weapons programs.
Weapons of mass destruction.
Right. Paved the way to war in Iraq. A terrible mistake. But the CIA also has a good track record of analyzing what the Russians are up to, what the Iranians are up to, what the North Koreans are up to. North Korea is kind of hard. But these people are serious spies and analysts who have weathered a lot of political storms. If they are not believed, they have no purpose.
They took a real hit, and I remember this. I was in college during 9/11, and I started my journalism career right after that. And I remember that there was a roiling distrust of intelligence agencies, of intelligence gathering. The American public, especially Democrats, but the American public broadly, felt that they were lied to get into the war in Iraq. They were lied to about WMDs. There was, issues with, Ambassador Joe Wilson's wife, Valerie. And there was this whole feeling that you can't trust them because their mission is to do political bidding.
That is wrong. The CIA is not a political agency. Its directors have been political, and this director, appointed by Donald Trump, John Ratcliffe, is a political animal to the marrow of his bones. He has a track record of twisting and distorting intelligence to please Trump. He has dramatically thinned the top ranks of the CIA. He fired all its new hires from 2023 and 2024 at the behest of Elon Musk and Donald Trump. He has imposed an ideological purity test, and, maybe worst of all, he abolished the CIA's diversity programs. If you want to spy in China or Sudan or any one of a number of nations where white guys are not the dominant class, it would be nice to have people who had the cultural and language backgrounds where they're spying.
And you say from your reporting and the conversations you've had with people on the record, by the way, who are giving their names, that they're worried that we are less safe as every day goes by because of broadly the politicization of the CIA, but especially after what's happening right now under the leadership of John Ratcliffe, under the leadership of Donald Trump.
And under the leadership of Tulsi Gabbard as the Director of National Intelligence, a known conspiracy theorist, Kash Patel of the FBI, who is dismantling its national security counterintelligence divisions, and Pete Hegseth at the Pentagon, who is, let's be polite, an amateur at his job.
That is a polite way to put it. Tim Weiner, thank you so much for joining us. The book is The Mission, The CIA in the 21st Century. It is the follow-up to the great, great book, Legacy of Ashes. Tim, congratulations. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Katie.